Hi, everyone, and welcome to Literary Modiin. I'm Julie Zuckerman, the author of the Book of Jeremiah, and welcome to the September Literary Modiin author event. Before I get started, I want to say a few words of introduction. Some of you have heard me give this spiel many times, and some of you haven't, so welcome to all the new people. For those of you who aren't familiar, Modiin is a planned city in Israel about halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, right near the airport, so come visit. We have a large population of English speakers here in Modiin. So in June 2019, I started Literary Modiin as a way to bring local Israel-based authors to the large community of English readers. And we had a few in-person events, but when the pandemic hit, we switched to a virtual format, which allows us to hear from authors and welcome attendees from all over the world. Today's event is our 28th, I believe. The format of the event is that each author will be speaking for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. We have a large attendance today, so everyone is on mute, but you can put your questions in the chat box. While the author is speaking, feel free to write your questions or put them in at the end. That either way is fine. If you have any technical difficulties, just send a private note in the chat to me. So we are not broadcasting this live on Facebook because there's some technical error, but I am recording this and I'll be posting this on YouTube later today or tomorrow. So without further ado, let me introduce our first author. Zibby Owens is an author, podcaster, publisher, CEO, and mother of four. Zibby is the founder of Zibby Owens Media, a privately held company designed to help busy people live their best lives by connecting to books and each other. The three divisions include Zibby Books, a publishing house for fiction and memoir, Zcast, a podcast network including Zibby's award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, and Moms Don't Have Time to, a new content and community site, including Zibby's virtual book club events and the former Moms Don't Have Time to Write. She is the editor of two anthologies, Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids, and Moms Don't Have Time to, a quarantine anthology. A children's book, Princess Charming, and now a memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature. Zibby loves to write. She lives in New York with her husband, Kyle Owens, of Morning Moon Productions, and her four children. So let me spotlight Zibby and ask her to unmute. And there you go. Take it away, Zibby.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. This is such a joy and an honor. So thank you so much. I am on day 4 of COVID, my third time having COVID, which is ridiculous. So anyway, I might not be quite as peppy as I usually am, but I'm giving it a go. So it's wonderful to meet you all and see some familiar names and faces there too. My whole thing has started because of my love of reading. My whole career, my whole book, everything. I have been writing since I was able to write. My grandfather was a rabbi and had a miniature printing press, my step-grandfather, and published a book of my stories when I was 9 years old. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers, and how the donut got its hole. Anyway, my name was on the spine. I thought it was amazing and decided to be a writer. And of course, there is no easy path to being a writer from age 9 to 46, which is what I am now. So my career has taken lots of twists and turns, including marketing, advertising, internet marketing, business school, and so much else. But the through line to all of it was that I was always writing and contributing to magazines and newspapers and writing books that didn't sell, and also reading. I read all the time. I have always loved to read, and I'm still a huge reader. So I ended up going through all these different phases of my life. And after I ended up getting a divorce, I found myself with some extra time every other weekend where I could read and write again after staying home with my 4 kids for 11 years. And I got back into writing. I started publishing a lot of essays about parenting and what that looked like those days. This is back in 2017, 18. And some of them went viral, and I ended up a couple of years later in another relationship with the man who's now my husband. And one night he said to me, "You should take all those essays and turn them into a book." And I said, "Oh, moms don't have time to read books." And I was like, "Oh, that's so funny. That'll be the name of my book." Well, publishers apparently weren't going to find that funny, according to the agents I consulted. but they wanted to know what other books I had in me because I had all these essays up on my website. And I decided maybe I could try to write a book called 40 Love, about falling in love again at 40. And I had another book I had written about losing my best friend on 9/11. Her name was Stacy Sanders, and she worked in the North Tower. So I had written all of that. I had written all this new stuff. And I decided to try to write the whole story and use books as one of the ways in which I tell my story, and how, what books I was reading at what times. And then at the end of the book, I have a whole reading list. So along the way, I turned Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, that title, I decided to put it on a podcast when a girlfriend suggested that that was the next smart move for me in resuscitating my career. And I started a podcast. I thought I would read excerpts and articles that I loved for friends who were too busy to even read them. And then I realized that was illegal. So I thought I would interview the authors themselves. And I didn't know what would happen, if I would like it or not. I kind of did it in secret. And once I sat down at my desk with an author, I was like, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. I absolutely loved it. I love authors. I love books. Getting a chance to really go deep and find out what I really wanted to know was just such a joy. I was a psychology major. I thought about being a therapist. I don't know. This just brought in everything I was doing. And then I could use the marketing background to sort of promote it. So the short version is that I launched the podcast, which led to a lot of in-person events. I started doing book fairs. I started moderating other events. And when the pandemic hit, I was really in a spot where I thought I could be really helpful to authors. And so I started an Instagram live show, and I ratcheted up my podcast to daily episodes, each 30 minutes with a different author every day. I did a virtual book club. I started writing the books column for Good Morning America, and just tried to do everything I could to help authors who had books coming out while trying to maintain my own sanity with my family and homeschooling and all that. After doing all of this, and having my own anthologies and books come out, I became intimately acquainted with the book publishing world and saw an opportunity to make a difference by starting my own publishing company, which I have now done. And we have our books coming out starting in February of 2023. We're going to be publishing one book a month in fiction and memoir. And I've designed it as a year of reading. So, and we will have a subscription model component to it if you want to just get those books direct. And they're books that make you think and feel with beautiful writing by a diverse range of women authors. So I'm really excited about that. And then just last week, we launched Zibby Mag, ZIBBYMAG, the new online literary lifestyle destination where we're doing lit lifestyle features about authors, book reviews, excerpts, book news from our community, classes, book groups, writing groups, and this, if you love books, you will feel great there. It is designed to bring back the glamour of the publishing industry and connect books to readers. And then I also have Zcast, which I'm going to rename Zibby Audio now that I have Zibby Books and Zibby Mag. And I've launched, I think, 7 podcasts with other people, most of whom are authors, about their own work. So that's kind of how this has all spread organically. It was not my intention. I did not have a business plan for that. I still don't, although my next thing is that I want to open some stores. So I actually am negotiating on a lease right now. So that's my next thing. But there's so much more to come. Meanwhile, I have this book that I wrote that came out in July, which is my sort of life's work and a very personal journey called Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature. And it was an Amazon First Reads pick, and got lots of wonderful press everywhere. And it's been a joy. I have an email at the end of the book, and I've been getting emails every day from readers who really responded to it. And that has made all of the book marketing and all of it really worth it. So I thought I would just read a page or two quickly so I don't take up too much of my turn, just to give you a sense of what my writing's like. And hopefully you will get a hold of Bookends and check out Zibby Mag, and follow me or the magazine or whatever. And if you're into all the content, you can sign up for our mailing list. Oh, thanks. Meryl's reading Bookends now. Well, this will be boring for you because I'm about to read a few pages quickly of the first chapter in about 3 minutes. So, okay. And each chapter is named after a book, and the table of contents is all books, and it's divided into 7 parts. And I realized that each part could be named after a letter in the word bookends. So that's how I structured it. Okay, chapter 1 is Little Women. The first time I cried while reading was during Charlotte's Web, but it definitely wasn't the last. I was 8 years old and up past my bedtime. I snuck barefoot into the tiny bathroom I shared with my little brother to finish the last few pages. I hopped on the toilet seat lid and sat crisscross applesauce while flipping through the book at my typical warp speed reading pace. Had you looked in from the outside of my fourth floor Upper East Side apartment, you would have seen the dim flashlight dancing over the dark pages. A little girl in her cotton nightgown, hunched over a book, motionless, yet completely moved. I could faintly hear my parents chatting in the other room, their voices muffled as I inhaled the ending. As Charlotte said goodbye to Wilbur, I burst into tears, my eyes so full and blurry I could barely keep reading. I've been crying in bathrooms ever since. That night I was hooked. Yes, I was already a bookworm. My mother had been taking me to the library every summer since I was born, refilling her L-Bean tote bag with as many books as we could carry out. I couldn't wait to read through them. First, her reading to me, and then reading myself, so we could go back and wander through the aisles for more stories. Every night, my mom would read to me before bed. First, picture books like Tilly's Rescue by Faith Schock, then Little Women, where I caught her trying to skip words. I read Gone with the Wind before I turned 12. By high school, I'd read most of my mother's books, too. My parents read constantly. Books lined the walls of our apartment and towered on both sides of their bed like the two lions outside the New York Public Library. That night in the mid 1980s, when I truly grasped the power of literature to evoke real emotion, changed my life. It sounds ridiculous, but Charlotte was my first experience with a sensation of loss. I grieved for her. The cracking open of a book's spine has always been an exercise in self discovery, healing, and fortification. That subtle whoosh when words spill out makes me salivate. Then the feel of the coarse pages under my fingertips delights my consciousness. The sudden sprinkling of syllables, the black and white letters in various patterns, coalescing to find their way directly to my heart. It's magic. Sometimes I stroke the cover for a moment, that smooth wrapping paper giving hints of what's to come. I peek under the flaps like a child examining a birthday gift. I smell the pages and take my time getting deeper in. Title, dedication, previous works. And then with a deep breath, I plunge into the first chapter like I'm flying off the white diving board into my black-bottomed childhood pool. That underwater intimacy stays with me for decades and returns when I just glance at the book spine, humbly lined up next to others on my shelf. It's no wonder that when I got out of bed after spending 9 days with COVID, that was COVID the first time, the first thing I did was pull every single book off the shelves in my home office. Over 6 hours, still weak and slightly dizzy, I touched every single book I owned as I reorganized my library into a rainbow of colored spines. Talismans, stories, reassurance, the characters greeting me, dancing around the dusty shelves when I couldn't be with real people. Books for me are life-saving. They have been my companions, my teachers, my entertainment, my emotional outlets, my escape. They've taught me how to cook, how to love, how to mourn, how to cope, and how to feel. They've allowed me to sort through my own feelings and escape into someone else's. I can recount exactly where I was when I read almost all the important books in my life. Most books came at just the right time. In fact, some of them don't strike the same chord with me at this stage of life as they did originally. When I recently reread Drinking a Love Story by Caroline Knapp, I wondered why I had related so deeply to it when it originally came out, although I still loved every page. On first reading, these books changed me. They are the vines I swung from to find my way through the jungle, one leading to the next until I found my way out. Perhaps that's why I've now dedicated my life to becoming a book messenger, trying to deliver the right books to the right people at the right time through my podcasts, writing, publications, and book recommendations. And I'm not alone. As I've connected with book lovers all over the world, I've found kindred spirits and so many others. My people, the friend in the group who is always recommending books, the one people call before they go on vacation for some up-to-date travel reading, the bookstagrammers, publishing execs, book reviewers, fellow literary podcasters. There is a whole tribe of book lovers out there who sees their mission as helping others fall in love with books. So here's my story, which includes many plot twists I never saw coming. Some good, many tragic, traumatic, all transformative. In dodging the roadblocks, I've ended up rediscovering my voice alongside the voices of so many others, and now I can't keep those voices inside. So that's the beginning. Silence. Okay, great. Great reception. I feel great about this. Really an ego boost today. All right. Well, anyway, that was my book and that's my story. And now on to the others.
All right. Thank you so much, Zibby. Thank you so much. Thanks, Cheryl, for saying it's nice to see us here together. Let me, hold on. Go to our next author. Okay. Marcus Pactor's latest book is Begat, Who Begat, Who Begat by Astrophil Press. His first book, Versus Death Noises, won the 2011 Subito Press Prize for Fiction. His story, Megaberry Crunch, was selected for the Best Small Fictions 2021. His work has most recently appeared in Always Crashing and 3 a.m. magazine. He lives and works in Jacksonville, Florida, and I think you also teach literature or something, right? You'll tell us when you unmute.
Yes.
All
I teach creative writing at the University of North Florida.
right, take it away.
So first, I want to thank Julie for inviting me to Literary Modiin. Really an honor, and it's really cool to hear from and learn about the work of other authors. I think it's one of the best things about an event like this is that you can see what other folks are doing and learn just what a wide range of writing and fiction is available to us. Fantastic. So here's my new collection, Begat, Who Begat, Who Begat. You can see it's a very thin volume. It is not like a big murder weapon of a book like Dostoevsky or Tolstoy might offer you. And when you look at it, it doesn't look like a professional or an aspiring professional writer should take a long time to write it. But I began that book in 2009, and from that beginning to the time it was published, 12 years, late last year. And part of it's because I'm a ridiculously slow writer, but along the way, I met my wife and we got married. We had 2 children, and it's very difficult to explain why you can't change the diaper right now because you have to get the sentence right. And so it took a while, but it was also fortunate that it did take a while and that I had all those experiences because not only because of love, which is good, but also because a lot of that went into the book. I learned a lot about home ownership and family life and all the wonders and all the fears that you can have when you have a young family. And it all went into the book. I'm aware that when I'm describing it right now, it sounds like a lot of very realistic domestic dramas. And some of that's in there. There is like one spouse is going to leave another and my kid's missing and so on and so forth. But there's also a lot of wild fun. There are toilets that send up gifts when you flush them. There are talking lawnmowers and the kind of fun that I've always enjoyed reading about in fiction. I always like the unexpected, the surprises, and the playfulness that an author can create. Those are the types of things that kept me up at night reading when I was a kid, as Zibby was just describing previously. Great stuff. And beyond all that, it's also, when I think about what I'm doing in these stories, they began even before I met my wife and began to date her. Just wanted to write a collection that would feel almost like a novel, and never had the time because even before I met my wife and all that, I had to work so much to write a whole novel, though I've tried and I'm still trying. And so I wanted to have a collection of stories that would have almost the feel of a novel, have that sense of unity from beginning to end. And so I began by selecting a series of objects that I just wanted to write about over and over again that weren't really even connected. There were androids and dogs and teeth and screws and other home repair products that I was just going to write about. And I was just going to have some fun and try to be creative by using them again and again in a lot of different ways. And so those all go into the stories. And there was also the first Kickstarter for the book was when I was teaching a fiction writing class, and a young woman turned in a story about date rape that had a number of flaws in it. It's about 3 pages long, and the victim wasn't assaulted until the bottom of page 2. And she killed herself on page 3. and talked about the story in class. And afterwards, she and I talked for a while. And I said, rape is such a terrifying subject and a difficult subject for anyone to write about. And part of the challenge is to make it about more than just our own fears and what everyone fears about rape. That has to be in there, and it should be in there. But more than that, to make it an individual sort of experience, a distinctive sort of experience, one that can have the unexpected element behind it, something that might even surprise you when you're writing about it. And I said, what if you just draw on her experiences that she might have beyond her victimization? What if she was like a business major? How might that impact the way that she is dealing with her difficulty? And I'm pretty sure she never did anything with that advice, not that particular advice about the business major. But I said, I will when I got home. And I was like, this is like something I'm going to write about. And I wanted to make it a different sort of experience because I've read many stories about rape before, but I came up with this. I hope people can see. Can people see this? Good. This is a story called My Assets. And one of the things that I like in fiction generally, and that I try to do a little bit in this book, is fiction that just looks different. Like as soon as you open the page, you say, this isn't going to be a story I've read before. This is going to be something else. And so this is the business major taking inventory of herself and what she owns, what she might own, what she'd like to own again after her victimization. See like her body, and like she's drinking a gallon of milk throughout the story. And eventually like she starts breaking down her body parts and her roommates and everything that she has in these little fragmented sections. And what I've tried to do is try to create an experience that I know I see many of y'all are women and on here, and try to make an experience that I can only imagine into something really distinctive. And I try to do that in story after story in the book. So here's Do the Fish, has like a lot of commands and responses. And then there's one that I think is a lot of fun called Archaeology of Dad. And in this story, the writer is remembering his father, who was a big deal pundit in the 80s. And back then he tried to get attention by drilling holes through a wall. And in the story, he's drilling holes through the story, which you can see on the page with his own little side notes and digressions that I think just like look interesting on the page and are kind of fun to like think about. Try to get as many ways as possible, some element of the unexpected, something that when a reader opens up on the page, they say, I haven't seen that before. I wonder what that's about. I hope it's cool, and I'll give it a minute to see what it is. And it certainly makes the writing process fun because I have to like think constantly about how can I make this a really distinctive and interesting sort of reading experience. And so all of those types of things kind of go into the book, where I'm trying to make a story after story that is its own sort of distinctive world with its sort of distinctive reading experience. At the same time, all kind of linked together by those images or objects. And yeah, trying to make the writing fun, and hopefully the reading is also kind of fun. Even I know I'm saying fun a lot, even though I've showed you the story about rape, which is terrifying. And so like, I think there's a kind of a constant balance between like, there's a serious artistic purpose and a kind of playfulness that I hope I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing pretty well. And so now I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I'll try to read this story, which is not so visually distinctive, But we'll kind of give you an idea of how I'm playing around with some of those objects and images. It's a short piece called Good Fat. And I'm going to try and make sure that I read enough of the story that you get a sense of it without going over my time. For weeks, our son had been spitting food. His boluses resembled gray lumps of paste. They hardened too quickly for me to get a mop and bucket into cleaning position. I had to sing him into a nap before I could scratch a putty knife at the mess and soak it with pine sol. Clean floor was no relief. I foresaw him starving and our family becoming featured subjects on the evening news. My wife discovered that he would eat anything smothered in guacamole, fried eggs, cut up chicken, shreds of spinach, whatever the government recommended. Toward the end of our 6th consecutive pleasant meal, on Shabbat, my wife professed that guacamole was putting good fat in his brain. I'd never heard of good fat, but I was willing to believe. He was eating, and we were eating, meals hot from the oven again. She said our brains were made of fat, mostly. She had bought economy candles at the grocery. On the table, they burned down between us. Their tallow had too sweet a scent. I said I'd better get at the screws. Those screws had fixed a tension between us months before, because I was supposed to have had them sorted in Tupperware bowls before our son's birth. I kept thousands of them in the garage. Drywall screws for indoor jobs, wood screws for outdoor jobs, concrete screws in case a neighbor with a brick house needed a hand. For my ongoing project, I'd acquired new and expensive screws online from an exclusive site for tool aficionados. They generated enough coal to maintain their original shape and threading, no matter what weather they faced. In general, my wife left decisions about screws and other garage business to me. Tonight, however, I felt my governance in jeopardy. Maybe I should have explained to her the project, preservation of the dog. Despite 6 months in the chest among the screws, he remained identifiably a dachshund. I took his frozen paw and held it for some time. I worried not that I was a fool. I had long understood that, but that I was a fool because I had never eaten an avocado. I asked him if I could have been an astronaut or TV personality, that I consumed better food as a boy. I asked if my lack of good fat explained my need to masturbate into a sock on Wednesday afternoons, a need which had been no more obviated by regular lovemaking than old-fashioned guilt. I asked if good fat had been discovered with good science, or if it was the product of fool brains fouled like mine, excuse me, by decades of bad fat consumption. And if so, did the cumulative effect of bad fat upon us imply that somewhere in the world there must be good fat to consume, whether in avocados or not? Or were all our fool minds too set on binary possibilities to see what else might be profitable to chew down? Like maybe red mulch. Were we too worried altogether about what to eat, given that we'd already eaten ourselves into fools? I asked if my questions had to make sense. The dog did not answer. His silence had been tolerable when all I had needed was his ear. But that night, his tail felt too much like the hooked handle of an umbrella, his tongue like sandpaper worn to nothing. I extracted his eyes and found the remainder of face too dark. A paw nail fell loose in my hand. It was a tender moment, like the time one of my dental crowns fell out during an act of love. 2 years earlier, after my wife and I had finished our Hila and wished the rabbi and our friends in the congregation Shabbat Shalom, we went into the parking lot, feeling fine about the world. Street light cut through our car, and when we took our seats, our bodies, I put my hand on her thigh. We were well engaged when the crown slipped free. I do not believe my wife, caught up and ecstatic, understood what had come between our tongues. Perhaps she did, but chose to go on. We all want to go on, of course, once engaged. I deftly swallowed the crown without interrupting. For a week afterward, I checked my stool to see when it passed. It never passed. Our rabbi, on the other hand, died the next month, and we were not satisfied with the new hire, and our friends in the congregation became less our friends, and we did not like the other souls in town. We tried our best to keep the customs on our own. We wanted to set an example for our son. On Friday evenings, we lit candles and said blessings, but we do not do well in regard to the law. I did not, still do not. That Shabbat, I did not refrain from work to play with the screws, nor did I close the chest to pray, though I did pray. May his brain grow thousands of folds of good fat. May he use it and keep it long after mine turns to paste. Thank you.
Great, that's great. Yeah, your book was very fun to read with all the different creative stuff you had in there, and I'm glad you showed everyone what it looks like on the page, especially Archaeology of Dad. That's a great one. Okay, and you muted yourself already. Okay, so let me introduce our next author, and we'll get to all our questions at the end. Hang on a sec. Okay. Hila Ratzabi's poetry has been published in Narrative, Alaska Quarterly Review, the Adroit Journal, and elsewhere. She's the author of the chapbook, The Apparatus of Visible Things, and the recipient of numerous fellowships. She previously served as editor-in-chief and poetry editor of Storyscape, and holds an MFA in poetry from Sarah Lawrence College. And you went to Barnard, it's not in your bio. She's currently the director of virtual content and programs at ritualwell.org and lives outside of Chicago with her partner and 2 children. And take it away, Hila. Hold on. Get back you. And
okay, thank you so much for having me, Julie. I'm so glad we actually got to meet in person when I lived in Israel briefly. So that was so great. So this is my first full-length book. There Are Still Woods, and very excited that it's out. It was a very long journey. I felt like I was relating to what Marcus was sharing. I started writing these poems back in probably starting in 2012-ish. And also along the way got married and had kids, and that also kind of wove its way into the book itself. And these poems really began as a response to Hurricane Sandy. And I was also going through like one of my typical periods of like not writing for a while, which is just my process. Like I always have ups and downs, and I've gotten used to that. And so I was kind of in this murky period of not really being happy with my writing and not feeling inspired and this and that. And so partly my husband was trying to help me get out of it by, just mess with whatever, just kind of do exercises or whatever it is. And eventually I decided to start reading some Scientific American articles just to see if there was anything that might spark my brain. And then the same, somewhere around that same time, Hurricane Sandy happened, and I was reading and starting to focus more on climate change. And then that just grew sort of one poem after another, responding to the experience of going through the hurricane. We were living in Philadelphia at the time. My parents were in Queens, where I'm visiting right now, in my parents' basement, as one says. It was a scary experience, and it made me want to learn more. And at some point, it really became a conscious decision to witness, sort of what is happening in the world right now. And instead of looking away from the things that were really difficult to look at, I decided I was going to turn towards them. So I started reading a lot of journalism and books and different things on climate change, and a lot of the poems, were responding to what I was reading. And And also along the way, I came across some very interesting mythology from the Inuit tradition, and that wove its way into the book as well. So there were certain characters from Inuit mythology that come up in the book, and that also helped kind of create some metaphors for this experience of trying to understand kind of what is happening right now, the earth. So I'll kind of read and talk and just weave the poems into what I'm reading here. After Sandy, Queens, piano on the sidewalk, SUV balanced on a fire hydrant, stairway without a house, Virgin Mary in the sand. Brooklyn, goldfish bowl without its fish, rotting meat at Fairway, child sneaker floating in a basement, woman's body under a tree. Manhattan, cars floating down Jane Street, waterfalls at Ground Zero, woman in a bathrobe doing a cartwheel in Times Square. Jersey Shore, roller coaster dumped in the ocean. Haiti, rivers of mud and cholera. Puerto Rico, man swept away by swollen river. And so as I kind of continued with this, I started applying to artist residencies. And at this point, I kind of had a project, something that could really be clearly articulated. So I went to a couple of different writing residencies. And so many of the poems were written at those residencies and were inspired by the landscape and place. And there was one, the Arctic Circle residency. And I had been accepted. I was really excited about going. And then at some point along the way, we were already trying to get pregnant. And I was like, if the timing works out, I probably shouldn't go if I get pregnant. And so it was really close. And then it turned out that at the time that I would have gone on that residency, I actually was pregnant. So I kind of figured it out early enough to say, I'm going to not take my chances. I'm still really sad that I missed out on it. But I did write a poem based on not having gone on the Arctic Circle residency. Imaginary Arctic. On the trip I didn't take to the Arctic Circle, I was eaten by a polar bear. I was pregnant and fell into the sea, and the embryo froze. I was stuck on a ship with a bunch of artists for 2 weeks. I saw icebergs the size of God's head. I wrote letters on frosted paper, ate granola bars, and sweated under layers of polyester and fleece. My eyebrows hardened. Everything melted in time-lapse speed, and the ship rose by inches each day. The sun never set. All that daylight did nothing but brighten the surface of loss. Where there were shadows, photographs were taken, sketches drafted in snow, music sifted from silence. On that trip, I wrote poems to the disappearing planet. I saw the poles meld together, houses float past on united seas. It was a new earth, a wet one. We waved from the hull of the ship, and the others waved back from windows in their flooded living rooms. Some were left bewildered, hands pressed to glass. We made passage through archipelagos that dotted the sea like cracked smiles. I took glaciers home as souvenirs. I planted my face in the snow. So another one of the places that I did a residency is called Willapa Bay. It's on the west coast of Washington State, and it's just gorgeous. And this was all of the residencies that I actually did end up going on were pre-kids, obviously. So they were mostly 4-week residencies. And Willapa Bay was one of the most beautiful and inspiring places for me. And so this one poem is called Willapa Bay. The 3/4 moon is tipped in the sky, still sleeping. Seagrass bristles, fulfilling its duty to the wind. I tip my head to match the angle of the moon, as though my ear could pull a tide from myself. The inner wave is calm, but broils below with a gratitude I'm careful not to drown in. What to do with it? Wind, weeds, water, earth. Now I know why they call you mother. How the tall grass waves in all our languages. Goodbye, hello, help us, help. How even when we go, the earth keeps us here. How living is nothing but a flutter of wings. The wind's one note catches in the branches of the great Sitka spruce with an effortless acceptance that opens some bowl in me to that sound. How can I walk away from this place that traces sky, mountain, water, wind in one seamless line? How can I walk away when I'm choked with the voice of the mother, parched from reciting the list of the dead? How can I walk away when the perfect horizon is killing me with a crazed love? Let me stay, let me stay. Let the cougar stalk, let the black bear roam. Come, come, beasts of earth and your armies of fur and horn. Let your bodies rage us down. Make your nests in the abandoned house by the bay. Raid the fridge, ruffle up the beds, let the land grab begin. We are not sorry. We are over. Let me stay, let me go. I'm the earth's. I am wild from the future's howl. Cry, cry, crows on the shore. What have you heard? What have you seen? Tell me what the bay said when you insisted. Tell me where you've hidden the bones in the field. So there's also a lot of God stuff in this book. I always had that in my poetry from the beginning, I think. Just it's been an interest of mine. I studied Jewish philosophy in college. Always very interested in philosophical questions of existence and God and all that kind of stuff. So even when I try not to, it just comes out in the poems. And this was another kind of way into this subject matter. This one's an Elul poem. It used to be called Elul. I changed the title eventually. But if you know the story that during the month of Elul, which is now, and we're coming up to the high holidays, there's an idea that God sort of is the king that comes into the field and meets us where we are. So that's where this poem kind of came from. In the field I have chosen, rustling sound of God's bare feet in the grass as the earth prepares to birth itself again. I thought there was something I was supposed to do to make that happen. The hawk only stayed an instant while the rest of the birds kept ticking. It turns out I don't have to do anything. The lake lives for its ripples. The wind licks the mirror. God is a placeholder for God, holding this place, Makom Ha'olam, where the branches parted, where the hawk turned back to the business of sifting wind. And so just another example of all this this kind of imagery kind of seeping in, and it's all not planned. This all kind of just wove itself in kind of naturally. This is a poem that was written based on an experience of being at the ocean, and then, as you'll see, you might hear a familiar refrain come into it, but I won't tell you what it is. Of the veritable ocean, I trace the jagged residue with my feet. The sand presses grains to skin, and I press back so the sand feels wanted. Waves fall like the word what. What is happening to me? And how will all my creatures go? Who by oil? Who by bomb? Who by storm? Who by dry land? By famine? Who by what? What? Water. I feel the people wade and wallow into my open throat. I cough a question and swallow it back. Which one of you can hear me? Water pools around my feet, singing, you, but who? What else did I want to say? I kind of like am more used to reading the poems than talking about them, but I'm looking forward to hearing questions after. Is there time for one more?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll do one more. Okay. And I should, I guess I can plug something too while I'm here. Can I plug something? While, after I kind of put together the book, for a long time, I'd been reading a lot of poetry that's in this kind of realm called eco-poetry, environmental poetry, which was really feeding me as I was writing these poems. But it was actually only after the book was sort of finished and getting ready to be published, I started thinking about the Jewish kind of side of it. And because I felt that I was writing both eco-poetry and something that was kind of like Jewish eco-poetry, and I started to look around and research, like, what were there other poets doing this? And there really weren't a lot in terms of, like, right now, there's like a few. So the more I went down the rabbit hole, I just decided I was going to teach a class on it. So I am going to be teaching a class. It's called Songs of the Grass. And it's exploring Jewish eco-poetry. So I basically went back through all of 20th century Jewish poetry and just picked out everything that I could find, and then pulled a lot of classical Jewish texts, Hasidic Jewish texts, and I've woven it all together into something that I think is going to be super fun. So for anyone who is curious about that, I'm happy to share more. I just had to make that plug. Okay. How to pray while the world burns. Go outside. Find a patch of grass, sand, dirt. Sit, kneel, place a hand or just a finger to the soft earth. Feel it pulse back. Open your palms and divine the words creased between. Rub the specks of dirt between your fingers. See how they cling to skin, how they listen in their soft, rough way. The earth will hold you better than God can. God could not stop the bullets or the sale of weapons. God could not block the open synagogue doors. Our God is trapped in the poisoned grass, where the blood of our brothers cries out, where the ants heave sentries on their backs. Pray to the God who sharpened the tiger's teeth, who stored the roar in its throat. Pray to the God who gave you lungs and tongue to sing and groan and hum. I swear to you, when the leaf shivers in the wind, you have given it chills from all its listening. The earth hears your prayer. There is nowhere for God to hide. Get down on your knees and let this precious earth soften for the weight of you. You are held. You are heard. The wind pulls its blanket over your back, smooths the hair from your face, touches your cheek with its cool, trembling hands.
Thank you, Hila. That was great. That was great. I'm gonna add our other authors to the spotlight and then ask them to unmute. Wait, I added myself. Okay. And Zibby. And while I'm doing that and asking y'all to unmute, I'll just say we had at least, to my mind, at least two other poets who appeared on Literary Modiin, who I wonder if you've encountered their poetry in your course. Marcella Sulek, City of Sky Papers, and Dina Ellenbogen, Apples of the Earth. She's actually she lives in Chicago. You should meet her. Yeah, but she was here in Israel a few months ago. So we had an in-person event again. So that one wasn't recorded, but you should check out.
I'm gonna look for her. I know Marcella, but I didn't know about Dina.
Yeah. All right. So let's see if anyone put the questions in the chat, or if Okay, I see a question from Marcus from Avi Landis, who also is one of our authors who appeared at Literary Modiin a long time ago. And he's the one actually who introduced me to your book, Marcus. So thank you, Avi.
Love Avi. Awesome.
At what point do you think of the story's visual component? When you talked about it with your publisher, was it something you would have insisted on?
Yeah, that I think different stories do different things, and I never do the same thing twice, and even like the order, the sequencing of what I'm doing never comes the same way exactly twice. And so, story like Archaeology of Dad, which is like probably the most visually challenging and difficult one, I didn't get to that until really I was putting the manuscript together. The original version of the story, the material that was in holes was in footnotes. And there were two problems with the footnotes. One is that I already had it. I have another story in the book that has footnotes, and doing the same thing twice didn't make a lot of sense. And my general feeling is like, can only get away with footnotes so many times before people get tired of them. And so I had to think of a different way of doing it. And I just kept going over and over, like insisting to myself, like, you have to find a different way till I came upon the holes. And then I had to learn to design them. And then when it came time for the publisher, you know, he was pretty cool with it, but he's like, this is a real challenge to like make this actually happen on a page. And it was the most difficult story to put together, like on a page that would actually work. And we went over and over again because you'd shift the hole this way, it would cover up this text over here, and like just a big technical mess. But it was really necessary to the story, I thought, just because one, I didn't want two footnote stories, and two, like I just thought like visually, like when you open the book and you open to those pages, you just say, that's a different thing. And as I said before, I want the different element to come into play, to catch the reader's eye immediately. And once I started doing it and I had the holes in place, I couldn't unsee them and say, no, we're not going to do the holes. We're going back to footnotes. It would have been like discovering the electric guitar, like, Jimi Hendrix saying, nope, no more electric. We're going back to acoustic, or even like worse, like Jimi Hendrix is going to play the harmonica. Like, no, you needed the guitar, and I needed the holes. And feel like stories would really suffer with, like, not just that story, but all the stories really suffer. They had a much blander flavor if they were all just paragraphs one after the next.
I think poets get to do that a lot, play around with the visual,
Yes.
how their words look on the page, and prose writers not so much, or very rarely. But it definitely lends itself to the story. I'm actually taking a class right now on lyrical writing with someone named Matt Kendrick, who, I don't know, someone recommended him on Twitter. And it's all about the sound and the rhythm and it, but like how you can make your writing more lyrical by using all these different mechanisms. But the visual is not something we're even talking about in this class. So maybe I'll recommend it to him.
Awesome, that was great.
Okay. There's another question up here from Meryl to Zibby. With all of your projects, how do you prioritize? Do you set aside a certain amount of time per week to write and read?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm struggling with that even today. I'm always recalibrating and just doing what I have sort of in the back of my head that needs to be done towards the end of every month. I'm like, have I done my GMA article yet? I should work on that. So like that's one goal for this weekend, as is working on my novel, which is due in March, but I'm trying to hack away at that. On the weekends, I try to read a bunch of the books that I'm going to need to be prepared for, but I also do that throughout the week. I like to keep it really fresh in my mind. I don't know. I just kind of squeeze things in. I wish I had a better process, but I really don't. I don't know. I just do my best.
Wait, tell us about your novel if you feel like it.
Oh, well, the short version is it's called Blank, and it's about a mom of teenagers living in Los Angeles who's a former best-selling author, whose next book is due, and she runs up against some obstacles and comes up with an unconventional solution to her problems. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, cool, very cool. All right. Okay, people put other questions you may have in the chat. I hope I didn't miss anybody's questions up here, but I have a few more. Hila, you lived here for a year or 2 years, or
2.5 years.
2.5 years? So did any of the poems in the book were they written in Israel?
No, I don't think so. And let's see, I was there from end of 2017 to mid 2020. So at that point, I was just submitting. And I had been submitting since various versions of the manuscript since something like 2015. And my first kid was born, oh my God, 2015. Yeah. Yes. And November 2015. My brain is like, so, and then new poems were written, after the kids were born that got folded into the book. But it was about 5 years of submitting. And I will just give a little shout out to my publisher, Sarah, who's here on the Zoom. And I'm just so glad it worked out that I found her and June Road Press, because it was like such an amazing experience working together. There's so much collaboration, great editing. And so, it really it took a long time, but it was worth the wait, I think. So, but yeah, I didn't write anything that made it into the book in Israel. And I actually started writing some fiction in Israel, which was a surprise. I took myself on a weekend little retreat just to go off and write by myself, and up in the north in Amirim. And I thought I was going to write poems or whatever. I would just see what happens. And I just suddenly started writing a story. It was a real surprise.
That's a great place to write echo poems. Like it's a vegetarian moshav.
It would have been, yes. And I thought I was going to write poems, and then suddenly I was writing fiction, and it was cool. And so I have a series of stories that kind of came out of that initial one. And so I'm still figuring out, I've been sharing them with various friends and folks and getting feedback and all that. So it's definitely an interesting process to try another genre, but yeah.
All right, and I have another follow-up question for you, since you said you were at so many writing residencies. There's a lot of writers in the audience as well. So, what were your favorite writing residencies, or for any of you who are?
I could say, Willapa Bay was my favorite. It was so amazing. The food was amazing. There was a really good chef. That's always great. It was much quieter than some other residencies. So there were only something like 5 writers and artists there at the time, and very just beautiful kind of nature kind of area. And I also did the Vermont Studio Center, which is kind of a more popular, well-known residency, which I loved, but it was very busy. So it was a really interesting, different kind of atmosphere for creation. And I loved that too. I loved getting to visit artist studios and just meet lots of people, talk to lots of people, and that also feeds the creative process. But I also really valued the more quiet residency. And then I also did one in Crater Lake National Park. So there's like one poem in the book that's specifically about Crater Lake. And that was a 2-week residency. And there's a lot of those national park residencies. So if anyone's curious about that and you kind of Google national park artist residencies, there's a lot of them all over. And this was just one that, happened to work out the timing that I applied and got in, it was just, but there were many, many others. So it's interesting. Oh, could you spell the name of that residency? Which one? Willapa Bay or I'll just Willapa Bay.
I'm all about the national park residencies. I just came back from a week and a half in Rocky Mountain National Park, Zion and Bryce, and I'm like convinced that national parks are like, no offense to everybody in our audience and our authors who live in America, but like to me, like that's the best thing about the US, it's the national park. So anyway, okay, there's a few more questions. Hold on. Janet is asking Marcus where you're from in Florida, and how does being from the South affect your writing?
Oh yeah. So I live in Jacksonville, Florida, which is the northeastern point of the state. We're just like half an hour, maybe 45 minutes south of the Georgia border. Being in the South, how does it affect my writing? Like I think of it mostly in terms of one, kind of quiet. Jacksonville is the largest city land-wise in the United States, and at the same time, it is a real sleepy city. Like it's a very quiet place. If you go to our downtown, the skyscrapers are like 15 stories high, maybe 20 stories high. So like it's not really Chicago or New York. And you can get a lot done in a place like this, and still kind of say you're in a city, which is good for me, and I like that. As a writer, the influence of Southern writers on me, I think, is pretty strong, although kind of indirect. Writers like Flannery O'Connor and kind of lesser known writers like Carrie Crews, extremely influential on me, just in terms of like their real eye to see weirdness in the world around them, and their kind of will to like make their stories, make their fiction really have a kind of definite tough mix of comic and horror inside of their work. Something I admire very much. And even though like I haven't opened a book by either one of them in like 10 or 12 years, like they're still kind of like in me. And that is very much ingrained in me. But yeah, I've lived in the South my whole life. I've never lived north of like this line of latitude from Jacksonville through Texas, where I've lived. And it is very much my home. And I don't know how y'all live in snow.
Okay. Okay, Abigail, and your pen, thank you. Was asking or saying that there's a wonderful range and variety in all of your writing. Do you all attend creative writing workshops, courses in groups, or only run them like Marcus and write with, and Hila, I guess, and write without needing them? So that's a question for all of you.
I don't do any creative writing, any classes anymore, but I did take many, many classes along the way. That was the question, right? What we're doing now. I probably should do more, but I'm not. I'm just sort of on the go writing. My class is Instagram captions.
Hila, do you want to?
I could say, I mean, I've done a couple over the years after my MFA, but it was definitely a struggle to find a consistent group or place where I could also not be the leader of the group. So that's like a challenge, because it's like when you know how to do it, that's just what I just naturally started doing. I was teaching all these different workshops privately, and now through Ritual Well, I'm teaching this one, and also curating like all of our programs. So sometimes with Ritual Well, I'll just sit in on the other classes that I've like basically like chose the teacher, and I was like, I'm just gonna, be the host, and then I'll just kind of sit in, and audit if I can, while also being the admin. And even sometimes when I'll teach, I'll try to do the exercises with the group, so then at least I'm kind of still, generating something. So that's kind of fun. I want to take more. I don't really have a lot of time right now, so that's the problem. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't take any more classes or anything like that. Feel in a weird way that I do learn a lot from my students. Reading students' work is oftentimes really interesting because they're trying a lot of cool things. At the same time, learning how to explain uh, what might be difficult uh, inside of a story, what might not be working inside of a story. Uh, I hope is useful to them, but it's also kind of useful to me to kind of articulate like what am I really trying to do? Why am I trying to do it? Uh, why does it work when I do this? Why does it not work when I do that? Is really useful. So in a way, it's an indirect sort of learning. Teaching is an indirect sort of learning experience for me.
Well, you didn't ask me, but I'm going to answer that one too. I have to say the best writing advice that I ever received, and then I'm going to ask you guys the same question. What's the best writing advice you ever received? But the best writing advice I ever received was from someone who said, just keep honing your craft. Like, keep at it. You're doing, this was before I knew I was going to have a book coming out. I was like submitting, and as Hila was submitting and submitting, and submitting to literary journals and getting some of my stories published. But she said, keep honing your craft, and it doesn't matter that you live in Israel. There's a million online, classes these days, and I don't have an MFA. Maybe if I had an MFA, I wouldn't feel the need. I don't know, but I just started taking more and more classes online through One Story or Grub Street or Kathy Fish for flash fiction, and this new guy I've discovered now, Matt Kendrick, for lyrical writing. And I really come away with something new from each class. So for anybody on the line who's listening, I would give you that advice from myself. Keep honing your craft. Now, what about you guys? What's your best writing advice you ever received? Silence.
I received so much advice. I don't even know what to pick first. The one that I've been using most recently, because I'm sort of struggling with this novel, is to always leave the document in the middle of a sentence, so that when you go back to it the next time, you can easily pick up where you left off.
I think mine is just to read everything. That's it. You really learn from reading, and I just feel like that's kind of the advice that I've heard just over and over again is that you really learn craft through reading, and so the more that you read, the more it feeds your writing.
So there are two things that stick out to me. One is from somebody, I don't remember who told me this, but just to write one sentence at a time, and really think about what the one sentence is doing. And is it interesting all by itself? Those things are important because each sentence is interesting. The whole story is going to be interesting, and you don't want a lot of dead air. And then the other one was from Harry Cruz, who I mentioned earlier, who was a teacher of mine a long time ago. And he said that you really have to write 1,000 pages before you're going to write anything good. And he pulled the number 1,000 out of thin air, it's an arbitrary number, but it really kind of just back then when I was 20, it was 1,000 pages sounded like forever away. But it also kind of just gave me permission to try everything, and just to keep going and not worry about whether it was good or not, because I was within the 1,000-page mark, so I knew it stunk. And so just don't sweat it, let it be what it is, and get to the next page, and keep going until you got somewhere. So you have to keep going and keep making sure the sentences are interesting, building up to bigger, interesting things.
Yeah, sometimes another piece of advice I got once was to write, to write it by hand. That's the thing. If I were to stick on the one sentence every time. In my first drafts, I would never get anywhere. I'd be like, I'd want to revise the first sentence, the first paragraph 1,000 times. So my novel draft, which is in the drawer on hiatus for a long time now, but I wrote the whole first draft by hand. Then I had to transcribe it. That wasn't so fun. But, just that act of writing by hand meant like I just had to keep going and wasn't going to look back. And I knew it was a shitty first draft, but I wanted to get it done. Okay, while we're on the subject of advice, I want to ask Zibby, since we do have a lot of writers on the call, like what advice do you have for writers getting started in this whole crazy world of publishing? What, al regel echad, as we say in Hebrew, like, it's a lot to ask, and like standing on one foot, what would you tell writers who are trying to get published?
I would say try to submit your very best work possible and make sure that you're good at what you do. I would say get a lot of external feedback, have people read it, edit it, make it as polished as you can, and have it just even try to maybe get some blurbs from author friends, things like that make it stand out and sparkle to the publisher.
And I have one last question, and I guess we'll end with that because I didn't see any other questions in the chat. But Marcus, since you're a creative writing teacher and I love writing prompts, you strike me as the kind of person who has a lot of great writing prompts up your sleeve. Do you give can you give us an example of a couple of fun prompts you've given your students?
That's a good question, because actually I don't often give prompts exactly. What I do tell people is that they should really go all in on whatever they're interested in. And it doesn't matter how mundane they think the interest is, because if you're interested in it and passionate about it, you can build good fiction out of it. The one short story that I wrote that was selected for the best small fictions last year is about breakfast cereal, because I like cereal. I've eaten cereal like my whole life, and like I just like took that and just made the character really overly obsessed with his cereal and just tried to see where it went. And it's a lot of fun, and like it ended up being like weirdly successful. And so you take whatever you're interested in, no matter how stupid you think it is, and you make your character like more than interested, like super obsessed with it, and push it as far as it can go in as many directions as it can go. And you might be surprised about what you can get.
Excellent. Okay, I want to thank everyone for your time today, this evening, this morning, wherever you are. I want to wish Zibby refuah shlema, get well soon from COVID. Hope your third case is not too bad. And thank you for being with us, even though you're sick. I also want to say that our October event is already scheduled for Sunday, October 23rd. We'll be having Sarah Lipman, whose new novel, Lech, just came out. Martha Ann Toll, who was on the call before. I don't think she's still here, and her novel also came out or is coming out like this week. Three Muses, and Diana Bletter, her novel A Remarkable Kindness came out a few years ago. So tomorrow I'm sending around like the email with all of the links and where you can find everything that everybody talked about tonight, and as well as a link to register and save the date, because November event is on November 20th, and Nancy, who's here, is going to be one of the authors. So, but we're still finalizing the rest of the details there. So the registration's not up for that. So, and next week we're in Rosh Hashanah, so I want to wish everyone who celebrates a Shana Tova, and the year of health and happiness and peace and all those good things. So thanks everyone. Have a great day. Shana Tova. See you next
Thank
month.
you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody.